You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got a rare look here into the Trump legal team where some infighting is making some news. Can you explain what's happening here?
I can try. One of Donald Trump's former attorneys, a guy named Tim Parlatore, has gone on record in a media interview as saying that one of Donald Trump's current lawyers, Boris Epshteyn, was interfering with lawyers on Donald Trump's team who were trying to conduct searches for classified documents at Mar-a-Lago once the federal government made it known that all of those documents must be returned. Tim Parlatore said flat out, Boris Epshteyn was not being honest with us. He made our job defending Donald Trump all the more difficult, and he interfered, that's the word Parlatore used, interfered with searches for classified documents. That is a pretty dramatic allegation of one member, now former member, of Donald Trump's criminal defense team against another member who is still actively representing Donald Trump.
If a Trump attorney leaves his legal team, does that person have an obligation to remain loyal to his former client? Or can that former attorney, Parlatore, can he then cooperate with the DOJ against Donald Trump?
Yeah, great question. So the sanctity of information that was learned by the attorney during the attorney-client relationship remains. And it remains, and it actually, believe it or not, survives the death of the client. So no, the attorney cannot begin revealing client confidences just because that attorney is no longer representing the client. But we have to remember, Tim Parlatore was already compelled by Jack Smith's team to testify in the grand jury, presumably about the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and yet he remained representing Donald Trump until fairly recently, which I find a little bit curious. We don't know exactly what Jack Smith had Parlatore testify about to the grand jury, but the question of whether he will now cooperate or be more forthcoming with the federal prosecutors now that he no longer represents Trump almost feels academic because he's already been compelled to testify once before the grand jury.
Right. I mean, those things do seem a little bit in conflict because you did say that he has to remain loyal to his client, but at the same time, like if he has already spoken with the DOJ and if he's going to continue to be interviewed by the DOJ and they ask him something, does he have the option then to say to invoke the fifth, or does he have to divulge any information? I mean, if he knows that a crime was committed, is he able to withhold that information just by virtue of the fact that he was Trump's attorney?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a balancing act. So the attorney-client relationship survives. So here's the thing. Jack Smith may have put Parlatore before the grand jury to talk not about his representation of Donald Trump or his privileged communications with Donald Trump. They may have presented him to the grand jury to talk about what some of Trump's other lawyers were doing when it came to the search for classified documents. So there are ways to put a defense attorney in the grand jury without violating the attorney-client relationship. The other thing is you can put somebody like Parlatore in the grand jury even while he's representing Donald Trump. And if the prosecutor asks him a question that he believes is protected by attorney-client privilege, he can simply invoke that privilege in the grand jury. And the prosecutor would have to figure out if they could go to court and find a way to litigate and defeat the attorney-client privilege, like, for example, if the attorney and the client were doing crime together, because then there is the crime fraud exception, which extinguishes the attorney-client privilege. You also mentioned the Fifth Amendment. In the event Tim Parlatore did something wrong that could expose him to prosecution, he can always invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Of course, that is a distinct privilege that he can raise separate and apart from the attorney-client privilege.
Now, Glenn, in our previous legal breakdown video, we did discuss the fact that Evan Corcoran was blocked from looking for classified documents in Trump's Mar-a-Lago case. He was blocked from going into certain rooms. He was only allowed access into the storage closet. Then he came forward or the information was then leaked. that he was blocked by other members of Trump's legal team. Now we find out that at the same time, we know that Boris Epstein was interfering with other lawyers who were searching for classified documents. Is it fair to say that these two things might just be related here?
You know, this is why it's so much fun putting a criminal case together, because putting the evidence together in a criminal case is a lot like assembling a puzzle where no one piece of the puzzle shows you the whole picture, right? You've got to assemble all the pieces and then the picture begins to emerge. Well, let's just take three puzzle pieces here. One, some Trump loyalist was blocking Evan Corcoran from searching Donald Trump's office for classified documents. Puzzle piece number two, Tim Parlatore, one of Trump's former lawyers, said Boris Epstein, one of Donald Trump's current lawyers and lackeys, was interfering with other lawyers representing Donald Trump, including in trying to secure all classified documents, search Trump properties for classified documents. And then there's a third piece of the puzzle, Brian, that we haven't yet talked about. But a few months back, the FBI secured a search and seizure warrant for whose cell phone? Boris Epstein. And lest people don't know what it takes to get a federal search warrant, a federal judge was presented sworn evidence by the FBI, and that judge concluded there was probable cause to believe there was evidence of federal crimes in Boris Epstein's cell phone, and the FBI seized it. We don't know anything more about it. That happened a number of months ago. But boy, you assemble those three puzzle pieces, and the picture that emerges is that Boris Epstein probably ought to get himself his own lawyer.
Yeah, yeah. Thereby further underscoring the MAGA acronym of making attorneys get attorneys. Glenn, are attorneys constantly having to leave Trump's legal team? Is that an indication of anything, or is this kind of high amount of turnover normal for a high-profile case?
It is far from normal. You know, frankly, once somebody undertakes to represent a client in a consequential criminal investigation or prosecution, it's actually pretty rare that defense attorneys start coming and going from that representation. It does happen, but it happens pretty infrequently. So the fact that we have lawyer after lawyer after lawyer cycling through their representation of Donald Trump, you know, is an indication that there is as much a problem with the client as there may be with the lawyers. I happen to believe there are problems on both sides. But yeah, I think Donald Trump is probably one of the most difficult clients for an attorney to manage. One, because you're probably not going to get paid. Two, because if Donald Trump's lips are moving, he's incriminating himself. And I can promise you, every defense attorney that has cycled through representation of Donald Trump told him the same thing. Keep your mouth shut, because no good can come of you talking about, you know, what you're being investigated for example. And we know Donald Trump disregards all that advice. Frankly, that's why at the end of the day, once these cases are indicted and prosecutors are actually arguing them to a jury, it's going to be like shooting fish in the barrel, because there's so much incriminating information that came directly from the mouth of the orange horse himself.
All right. Well, obviously a lot to stay on top of here as more members of Trump's inner circle, his legal team, continue to get kind of wrapped up in this case, wrapped up around the axle themselves. So if you want to stay on top of all this stuff, as soon as it breaks, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.